Okay. Wow, it's such a pleasure. I've been hearing amazing things about what's happening in Salem for a number of years, and this is my first time up here, and it's so good to be here and touch what you're all up to and how you're working together. It's exciting. I want to dive in. I've been thinking long and hard about you guys and what we're going to do. Is that my slide? Let's see. Let's go back. I want to. Chris in the video talked about transformation and creating the conditions for transformation. And I think that at this point in time, there may not be a more important topic than transformation, but I also think that it's highly misunderstood. Most of the time when we're talking about transformation, we're not actually talking about transformation at all. We're talking about something different. And so tonight I want to dive into what is this thing? Why is transformation critical, at least from my point of view? You'll have to decide whether it is from yours. And then dive into what it is, get really more clarity around what it is, and then figure out, okay, if we're going to buy into the need for transformation, what does it look like? What do we do? So that's what I want to do together with you tonight. And I want you to keep something in mind as we go. I want you to think of this room as a metaphor, okay? Here we sit, we're a bunch of individuals, we're also grouped at tables. This could be a metaphor for a company, it could be a metaphor for a community, it could be a metaphor for a nation. What would transformation mean in this context? In this room, if we were going to be involved in transformation, what would that look like? What would be different about this room if we were in the middle of transforming? Just keep that in your mind. We're going to come back to that at the end and see if we have some thoughts about that. And I want to start with, right now there's sort of an iconic figure when you think about transformation. For me, this is the guy I think about. Who knows this guy? Ted Lasso. Who knows Ted Lasso?
I know him.
Oh, you know him? Now, Ted Lasso, so he's a character in a TV show on, what is it, on Apple Plus? It's, and the story is that there's a football team, a soccer team in Great Britain that's in the Premier League, but they're terrible. And the new owner, there was a divorce, and the wife took over the team, and she knew her ex-husband loved this team, so her goal in life was to torpedo the team and destroy it. And her plan for destroying it was, we're going to bring in a new coach, a football coach, but an American football coach, not a soccer coach, from college football, this guy Ted Lasso, and she figured, we're going to bring this guy in, and the team is going to go down the tubes. He knows nothing about soccer. And it's true, he knows nothing about soccer. But what Ted did, and if you watch this show, you'd get a kick out of it, Ted brought in, how would you explain it? The way he came in as a human being and related differently to the players, how he invited the relations to be entirely different across the team, ended up transforming this team. Now, there are all kinds of peaks and valleys on that, but it's really an amazing story of transformation from a guy who knows nothing about what he was supposed to coach about. Now, when we get into why, at least in that story, that becomes a transformative story, it'll be helpful to think of another metaphor. And I want to think about an atom together with you for a moment, and specifically two aspects of this basic sort of building block of nature, an atom, that are very instructive about what transformation is and what it isn't. And the first thing I want to dive into with you is the concept of leaps. Now, you've all heard of a quantum leap, right? That's in our nomenclature now. But here's where the term comes from. So here's a picture, a rendition of an atom. You have the nucleus in the center, and you have these electrons that are orbiting around this nucleus at different distances away from the nucleus, okay? And scientists, about 100 years ago, one of the mysteries in physics was why you would only find electrons at certain distances from the nucleus. There's certain orbits that an electron can be on. It cannot be in between those orbits. They won't be there. An electron it's not orbiting and decides, I kind of want to get a little further away and I'll go sneak a little further away from the nucleus. No, it doesn't happen. It's locked in an orbit until it's not. And all of a sudden, boom, it's on another orbit. And that leap is called the quantum leap. Now, how does it happen? Well, the reason electrons leap is because the atom intersects, it has an interaction with some other force of energy, some other piece of matter with the energy that it brings, and that intersection, this relationship between this atom and this other thing forces a leap, injects energy and leaps, and the electron leaps to a new sort of state. Okay, so it leaps, and this will be important when we think about transformation, because I think we're going to discover that the same principle applies to us in our transformations, that it happens in response to interaction. Okay, no one transforms themselves. I can change myself, I can get a little bit better and improve, I can do that myself, but a transformation, if you think about the term, just think of the word transformation. It's a different formation. I don't do that to myself. That happens in relation. Okay. Now so that's one concept, leaping. Okay. Here's a second, and I think it says I can't say it's combining, or something, or combination, or something like that. Right? Is that what it says? Okay. So one other thing about an atom. Let's consider a particular kind of atom. Let's say that, and I'll personify this. Let's say that I'm an hydrogen atom. Okay. And let's say that you, sir, Anthony, you're also, come on up with me here, Anthony. So we're a couple of hydrogen atoms. We're perfectly happy being hydrogen atoms. We can go through our whole lives being hydrogen atoms, and we'll look the same, and our electrons will be orbiting the same way they always are. But then let's say we meet Colleen. Colleen, come on up here. Colleen and Anthony. Now, Colleen is an oxygen atom. She's also perfectly happy being an oxygen atom. She's just fine with that, okay? And she's sort of going through her life that way as well. But we all kind of get together. And what happens now, when we combine, we become something entirely new. We're now a water molecule. We're still our hydrogen atom. She's still her oxygen atom. But the combination of that transforms this separateness into this amazing new form known as water. And that's what happens at the molecular level with everything. All the combinations we see are combinations of these separate things that come into relation, and that relation transforms them into a different kind of a state. Make sense? Okay, all right, thank you. So these two, we're going to come back to these themes, but leaping and combination happening, first of all, through interaction on the one hand, it creates the conditions for leaps. And then combinations then creates this, what you would recognize as a transformational change. Now, with that sort of in mind, let's take a look at, we'll come back to Ted Lasso for a moment, but I want to compare together with you two things. On the one hand, we're going to compare change, and on the other hand, we're going to compare transformation. Because normally, most people in my experience who are talking about transformation and are saying we really need transformation around here, they actually aren't talking about transformation at all. They're talking about change. Maybe significant change, but change nonetheless. So let's think about the differences here. So change is continuous. It's smooth. We can keep getting a little bit better every day. And in a competitive marketplace, we have to do that or we go out of business. So we're all working on this continuous sort of change. But on the transformation side, as we already talked about, it's not continuous, it's discontinuous. It is, if you will, leapy, okay? Transformation is leapy. It comes in chunks and bounds, okay? Secondly, change is predictable. You can sort of plot out, if we put these sorts of inputs in and this sort of effort, we're likely to see, these sorts of results. Well, transformation, on the other hand, is surprising. Because different things come in common, all of a sudden they combine in certain combinations, and you don't know anymore what might come out of that. It might be something you didn't anticipate. In fact, if I try to put a cap, if I try to say, I'm going to get this together to make this certain kind of result, I've just ensured that what we're working on is change and not transformation, okay? If I'm trying to lock that down in advance. Change also is manageable, and transformation is, I'll say, promotable, but by nature it's unmanageable. You can't sort of manage all the pieces. You can promote it. You can, as Chris was saying earlier, you can create conditions that will maximize the opportunity for transformation to happen, but you can't manage it in the same kind of way. Change, too, is self-executable. I can decide I'm going to change. I can start working on things. I can start doing things like that. But interaction is actually the creative result of interaction and relationship, as we've discovered with the atom. I don't do that myself. No one transforms on their own. And then, then change also then is something you do, whereas transformation is something you participate in that happens to you. You're part of it, but you're not the only part, and you're caught up in this transformation. So now, change versus transformation. Now, change is critical. As I mentioned, in a competitive market, if we're not changing positively, and working on that, then we start to fall behind all the competitors, and we don't exist at some point. So we all need to be working on continuously on getting better. But transformation, what I'm going to suggest to you is that alongside that, we want to strategically really prioritize creating conditions so transformation can happen, because that, in just sort of crass economic terms, that's the only way you actually get set apart in a competitive marketplace, is you leap beyond just the continuous change curve to something more than that. That's one. But even more than that, and for me this is much more important than that, we're at a point in time in the world, I would say, that this issue of transformation is almost existential for us. I think it's that important, and I'm going to explain more about what I mean by that. There's a certain kind of transformation that needs to happen. Part of what for me is exciting about this room in Salem with people from all kinds of different parts of this community is that it portends really amazing possibilities around the kinds of transformations that I think could be models for what needs to happen across the entire country. And I'll get more into that specifically here as we go. Okay, now, so most people in my experience are talking about transformation, actually aren't talking about transformation. In fact, many of them don't even want transformation, because if I'm a leader of a company, I'm pretty happy with where I am. I like the orbit I'm in, right? I don't want to be pushed to another orbit, especially if I can't control it entirely myself. And so there's an element of self-preservation that can maybe lock us into only the change curve and not necessarily to the transformational leap. But there's something happening in the world right now that's actually forcing a big transformation. We're going to get into that next. And it's the kind of change I think, at least personally, is what it's most needed. So let's dive into what's happening in the world. There's a trend. I'm going to call this the big shift. There's something happening. We're in the middle of it. A lot of times when we're in the middle of something, we don't realize that it's happening until you look back historically and say, oh my word, I was there. I lived through this big change. And it's a massive change. And I want to go back in time a little bit here. So if you think about, and I can't quite see, and have to take a look at this here. Okay, yeah. So if you go back even just 200 years, the most valued people were the people who had bodies that were strong and vibrant. They could lift a lot of weight. They could run fast. They could lift. Because jobs, so much of what was in the workplace was actually based on bodily ability, physical ability. Okay? So the people who were paid most were the people who were the strongest, the fastest. The people who were valued most were those folks. Now, would you say that on balance that that's still the case today? That the people who sort of can lift the most and run the fastest? On balance, I mean, in some industries they're built on that, but most not. And the reason why is because with the Industrial Revolution, what happened is machines started to be created that became a lot better at most physical labor than our own bodies are. And so mankind became increasingly displaced from the physical sort of kinds of labor, okay? And what happened as a result was that physical strength and ability became relatively less valued than a different kind of ability. And that forced us, and this was a change now that's historical, but we're in the middle of a change that's analogous to this. We're going to get to in a moment in a different way. It's a new shift, and it's going to require a new leap. But it shifted the valued part of sort of mankind's ability more toward the mind. So it used to be the strong were rewarded, but as this shift came through with the Industrial Revolution and machines displacing bodies, then the brains became more valued. So the smarter you were, the more you were paid, the more you were highly valued, etc. Okay? which brings us to the shift we're in the middle now. So this has been going on, say, the last 60, 70 years in particular. We've been living, whereas most of humankind's experience from the beginning was bodies were valued the most in the marketplace. Over the last 70 years or so in particular, it's been a mind-based economy for the most part. But we're in a transition, and the reason we're in a transition is because just as bodies were displaced by machines, minds are becoming displaced by machines with AI and all the developments of AI, that already so many things that we would use our minds to do, machines have already replaced. And the things that still our minds are the only ones doing that machines haven't yet replaced, many of those are going to go too. So you get the displacement again. We are forced, and this is the force of a transformative leap that we're all in the middle of. And it's hard again to see because minds are still highly valued and fantastic, and there will always be a place for that. But there's a third now facet of human capacity that is increasingly becoming valued and will become more and more valued as we go forward. And if you think about body, mind, what's a third capacity of human? What are we going to talk about? Body is stage 1, stage 2 is mind, stage 3 is, okay, you could say spirit. I'm going to say heart, okay? We're going to use heart as a metaphor here. And heart has to do with our ability to relate. The unique ability of human, why it's unique compared to machines, I'm going to come to that in a moment, but we have the capacity to relate, okay? And that relatability is something the machines cannot duplicate for a particular reason. And so what that means, among other things, is those who get better, leaders and others who get better at this relation aspect of living and of working are going to increasingly do much, much better in communities, in the workforce, and they will be the ones who actually create the huge sort of opportunities, a new heart-based economy, just like the mind-based economy had a whole set of jobs that came up and whatnot. The heart-based economy will as well. And we'll look back on this 60, 70 years from now, we'll go, wow. Remember when they were just paying us for our brains? I mean, it's just going to be, it'll be just as large of a shift as these other prior shifts were. Now, let's get for a moment to what is it. Because you might say, oh, well, look, machines are going to be able to do the heart thing too, and then we're all cooked and we're just going to come to banquets all the time and hope machines pay for it. But no, I actually believe there's something about being a human being that machines will never be able to duplicate. That's my view. And it has to do with this. So think about why are we able to excel in relation relative to machines? Why is it a competitive advantage? Let's think about a person. So if you look up here on the screen, here we have a figure of a person. And very simplistically, I'm going to say, think about two aspects of a person. There's what we call the exterior or the surface of a person. Okay? What you can see of me, my expressions, my words, my outside. Okay? And then there is the interior or the depth of a person. What you can't see. How I'm feeling, what my experiences are in life, all those sorts of things. That's my inside, that's my depth. So you have the outside, the exterior, you've got the surface, you've got the inside, you've got the depth. Now the question is, what parts of a person can machines relate to from that diagram? What would you say? Exterior. Now, what if I were to say, yeah, but come on, Anthony, why can't machines relate to interiors, to depth? Why not? Okay. They can't access the input. Okay. They can't. Okay, they're input only. Now we could try to input as much interior into them as we could, but even so, they don't have an experience they don't have the depth and the interior sort of essence that human beings do. We can try to mimic that, but they're different. They are machines after all. Okay. So they can see exteriors and surfaces probably better. Well, they'll see that better than we do. We won't be faked out like we are by a lot of things. But the inside will remain opaque to them to the degree that they don't have the same kind of inside and that kind of depth themselves, which is what distinguishes us, human beings, is actually we have the capacity to be able to connect at depth. That's our unique capacity. And one of the things that means is if we're not connecting at depth, we're no better than machines, ultimately, in the coming economy. Okay? And if I'm someone who connects at the exterior only, then at some point, as this shift sort of moves fully over the economy and over I'm going to find myself in trouble. So to really figure out what is this issue, this relating at depth, what is that and why does it matter? Now, one of the reasons it matters, what I'm going to submit to you is that this issue, being able to relate at depth, is the foundation of transformation for us. To the degree we can connect and relate at depth, we're going to be able to have those intersections, those relationships and whatnot that actually are or have the capacity to spur us to transformation. If all we're doing is interacting at sort of this exterior surface level, it's not going to happen for us very often. So we're going to dive into now this issue of depth. I want to get inside it a little bit more together, see if we can get a feel for it, because there are times when we relate at depth and there's sometimes we don't. In fact, let me give you an example of one of those that happened last night when my wife and I were over at the, we just flew into the airport and we went and rented a car at Enterprise Car Rental. Okay? So we come up to the counter at Enterprise and there's a gentleman helping us. Really nice guy. In fact, he was a really nice guy. We got in a conversation and he just waited. He didn't want to interrupt that and he just waited on. Really nice guy. And I don't remember his name. In fact, I had forgotten his name probably within 2 seconds of him introducing himself. Okay? So I was there sort of with it. Now, do you think I was interacting at depth with this gentleman? No, it was very transactional. Now, he had a colleague come up who was going to be the guy to take us out to the car lot to help us choose our car. So, and he was a nice guy, and my wife Catherine made a comment that, oh, you're dressed, he and I were kind of dressed the same. So she made this really sort of observant, comment, and he responded back, and he'd told us his name and been introduced, and we started walking out toward the lot, and I'm walking there, and I think to myself, I can't remember his name. I can't remember this guy's name. And everything for me up to that point had been so thin in terms of interaction. It was just, I'm sort of here getting a car, not really paying too much attention. I just have to get this done. This guy's going to do that for me. I mean, that's the extent of this relationship, if you want to call it that. So we get out to the lot. It turns out he's a super nice guy. And then all of a sudden, I remember all of you guys, and I go, oh man, tomorrow night, I'm going to be with a group of people. We're going to actually be talking about this stuff that you're completely blowing right now. Let's think about what's going on right now. And so at that moment, just that realization, I'm like, oh my word, this guy, I mean, there's no connection here at all with him. So at that point, I sort of changed. Now, first I asked Catherine, remind me his name. She told me his name's Christian. Okay. And so we started to get in a conversation. It turns out he's super knowledgeable about the industry, about the cars, really, really pleasant guy. Okay. And so we drove away. It was sort of a different kind of experience. Now, that wasn't a real deep experience, but I could see in that span of a little bit of time, I could feel a difference in some kind of difference in about how we were interacting with one another. Okay. Now, I want to push on that a little bit and think about 3 different levels of relation. And the thing about this is the deeper you go from level 1 to level 2 to level 3, the greater your capacity for transformation, greater your transformation readiness. It's a level 1, transformation's like, it'll be a miracle if it happens. Level 2, it can happen, but it's going to be a struggle. Level 3 is the seatbed of where transformation is born, okay, and birthed. So here's level 1. If you just look at this diagram, there's a depiction of 2 people, and you'll see the way it's drawn that you have, remember there's surface, we all have a surface and we all have depth. So we have at the surface might be our images, we want other people to see us a certain kind of a way, we're trying to maintain what people think about us. There's the stuff you can see. Then there's this depth, our essences, what's really going on. And a lot of times we keep that closed up, don't we? I mean, I don't want you guys to know what's going on. And I'm not real interested in what's going on for you. I mean, we can kind of go through our lives that way so often, the way I had been at the Enterprise counter. Well, at this level, you might just think of this is a separate way to be in relation. I mean, I'm a person, here's someone else, but we're not The relation is basically just a separate one. And you see this in organizations, by the way. We call this silos in organizations, right? You can have whole groups whose relations are just separate, okay? That's level one. Here's level two. So we'll take it a deeper level. Now we're actually going to engage. Oh, by the way, before I do, just here's a question you can ask yourself. Where in my life am I like that? If you're like me, like at the rental car counter or how many other places, you can just sort of think, where am I kind of just in relation at surface? Now, I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying just to notice that and just realize what the consequences of these various ways of being a relation might be. Here's the next. So let's say I'm in a company and I realize, oh my word, we're siloed. People are just separated. We need to get interaction happening. And so there might be a lot of things we might do to get people sort of talking. And that might help move us to a level. Let me ask this question first. Sorry. So can machines operate like that? Sure, machines can, right? I mean, machines can operate in a separate way. They're perfectly fine doing their own thing. So machines can do that. How about here? So here, the two of us again with our surfaces and our depths. And but still, here we are sort of enclosed. My depth is sort of separate, and we're sort of interacting through our surfaces. This is what we call a surface level interaction. So we have the interaction going, but I'm not really affected by it so much. It might be casual conversation. It might be some fun conversation. It might be some real banter. There might be interactions like that. There might be things at the workplace we're doing together. But you don't move me. I'm not changed at all. Nothing new really happens in me as a result of that relationship. We can get things done, which is good, okay? And a lot of things we do in life will be that way, and fair enough, okay? So now here again, so we call that the surface way. And a question then again is, where in your life do you see yourself like that? What parts of your life are more sort of the surface level of relation? Now, in my experience, and my belief about this is most of life is happening in these two we've seen, separated surface for most people. In fact, almost all of online life is surface, because all we see online are just images. They're just our exterior images, right? There's no touch to the essence online. So we live in a very sort of, my experience, separate and surface sort of existence. And question then again on number two is, can machines be in a relation like this, surface to surface? Sure, they can. Machines can do that just as well as we can, maybe better, okay? Which brings us to the third level. And this is the level we call deep, okay? Now, the level deep, I want to introduce a few terms. I printed off a page up here so I could see them because that's too far away over there. I want to introduce you to a few thinkers who, for me, are amazing historically. They've been super helpful for my own thinking. In fact, I was just reading on the flight over one of these thinkers, and here's someone who's passed away 100 years ago, but it's like they're sitting right next to you, right? You're reading their words. It's a miracle. You read a book, and it's like you're in conversation with someone as if you're right with them. And I just felt myself, my thoughts and my feelings just sort of leaping, sort of in conversation. His thoughts and his expressions were just spurring me to sort of new places. It was really thrilling. And so I'm going to introduce you to three people that I think quite a lot about historically. One, a number of you know this first name. The second two, probably very few of you do. But probably a lot of you know this fellow, Martin Buber. Raise your hand if you know Martin Buber's name. Not too many. So Buber wrote a book, very important book called I and Thou. It's really fast. It's only like 120 pages, but it's a monumentally important work, really fascinating. But he called this sort of deep interaction, he had a few names for it. He called it the between, because you notice what's going on up here at the level of depth is we're connecting. So Anthony, I'll pick on you again. So if Anthony and I were at level 3, it's like we've broken through the surface here. My essence, I'm open to my essence to Anthony, and in this case, he is to me as well, and which means I'm being affected by him. It matters. I'm becoming someone different because Anthony's helping to form me simply because he's in my life in that particular way. We have people like that in our lives, don't we, that they are formative for us. Our essences change as a result of knowing them. But that's because, among other things, we've opened ourselves, we've broken through the surface, we've opened and allowed them into our essence as well. And we've expanded, we've become larger as a human being because of that, because it's not just us sort of hiding in ourselves, we've invited more people in, right? And they've helped to change us. So Buber called that the between. So you have this place between now where all this stuff is happening, where before it was just space or maybe some behavioral collaboration. Now you've got all of this where sort of our personhood is sort of merging, okay? Another thing he called it was genuine dialogue, and he called it essential relation. Essential relation because when we connect at depth, our essences are affected. Our essences are formed. We interpenetrate each other. We help to change each other, okay? Those are a few terms that Buber uses. Here's someone probably, let's see if anyone's heard of Gabriel Marcel. Anyone ever heard of Gabriel Marcel? So Buber was Austrian, Marcel was French, a philosopher, same era, about a century ago when he was doing most of his work. He called this, a really beautiful term for this, communion. This level of being at depth of relation is, I'm in communion with these people. And he also called it the intersubjective. It's not me over here and you're over there as some object. It's like we're both subjects and we're both intermingled together here and we're helping to form each other. A third thinker, probably no one's heard of, he's Swiss-German. His name's Jan Gebser. Anyone heard of Jan Gebser? Okay, Jan Gebser has a fascinating, sort of his monumental work is called The Ever-Present Origin. It's a fascinating read. But Gebser says Gebser talks about three different kind of different perspectives we can be moving through life with. One is early on in our lives, like when we're first born, we're just sort of kind of like we're born into like a social soup. There's noises everywhere and flashes and sounds, but I mean, we don't have a language that equips us to differentiate any of that stuff. We're just sort of plastered into all the thing that is. And so that's what he called the non-perspectival state. I don't even have a perspective. I mean, I don't know enough to have a perspective. But then we carve ourselves individually out of that collective and we gain a perspective. We have our own perspective. He called that the perspectival stage. This third one, I bring my whole personhood, all of me, not just my surface, I bring my depth too, and I engage that way in real encounter, real relationship. And we merge in this sort of way. We go beyond individual perspective. He called it the a-perspectival stage. It's like, we are sort of unlocked from just like an individual perspective at all. We can rise above, we can sort of see and experience something in an entirely different way. That's what Gebser is talking about as this stage when he's talking about the change in perspective. Now, let's ask the same question. Can machines do this? Can machines do that? Depth, related depth. No, this is the unique realm of human beings. This is where, if in the future we're really going to bring the most value to the world, it's going to be because we're bringing value in an area where the machines that were bringing so much value we used to can't bring it. And it's this capacity to be in this deep, meaningful sort of space where we're considering each other. Doesn't mean we agree necessarily, but we're open. Our minds are open. Our hearts are open. We're willing to be changed by one another. Now, I think we live in a world, it's probably always been this way, where, especially, let's say I'm a leader in an organization, I sort of feel like it's my job to change other people, right? So like, I know where we're going and I'm going to change folks to help them get there. And that's a way, we can do that. We all do that sometimes. That's not going to lead to transformation. We might change in real positive ways. But transformation is going to require, in a given workplace, as leaders, we're going to have to open ourselves up in this way and allow ourselves to realize, look, my primary job is not to influence the people in this organization. My primary job is to be influenced by the people in this organization and by the people outside this organization. I need to break open and allow others in. Because if I don't do that, it's just going to be me. I mean, it's just whatever my vision happens to be, that's where we can go. But when others are let in, all of a sudden, all kinds of things explode out of that. In fact, have you ever seen like an improv comedy sketch? You see, you get a bunch of people up on stage, and one person goes off, and the other person riffs off of that, and someone else riffs off of that, and all of a sudden, all this thing is created, which no one of them could have made up. That would not have happened except for each of them on the stage diving in and merging, okay? And people who are actors or people or improv folks, the people who are best at that are the people who actually can connect at depth, that they're not acting. In fact, let me give you an example of this. Anyone ever seen a rendition of King Lear, in film form? It's one of Shakespeare's plays. Well, King Lear, Shakespearean play, and there's a gentleman I know, he was teaching a college class on, the whole class, one whole semester, was reading Act 1, Scene 1 of King Lear. That's it. They just studied every word, they studied all the parts, and then the grade was entirely dependent on them putting on Act 1, Scene 1 of King Lear at the end of the semester, the entire grade. And so someone was King Lear. It happened to be an engineering student, was King Lear. And you had people playing King Lear's daughters. And one of the daughters, two of the daughters just wanted their dad dead because they wanted to inherit the kingdom. One of the daughters actually really loved him. But the dad got faked out about that. He turned on the one who really loved him. And he embraced the two that just wanted him dead and wanted all of his kingdom. And there were two suitors that wanted the one who, her name was Cordelia, the one good daughter. There were two men who wanted to marry her. And one was called Burgundy and one was called France. And when they found out that King Lear said, well, there she is, you can marry her. You don't get anything if you marry her, but you can marry her. And one of them, France, wants no part of it because he was just in it for the money too. But Burgundy loved her. Now, what was cool about this, and this was filmed for PBS. What was cool about this was, in real life, these students playing Cordelia and Burgundy were actually a young married couple. In real life, they're actually married, okay? And they're love interests now in this play. And Burgundy, when they're filming it, keeps blowing his lines. He gets blowing it and blowing it and blowing it until finally he says, I can't do this, forget it, I'm done. This is stupid. And the director, he says, why don't everyone, let's take a break. And then he just invited Burgundy, the guy inviting Burgundy to stay. And so he sat down on the stage, and he sat down in the middle of the stage next to him. They just had a chat. And they decided to give it one more go. So Burgundy gets up, they do another cut. And Burgundy makes it through all his lines. And Cordelia is so moved by her husband giving it another shot and making it through all of his lines. She's overcome with emotion, with a love for this man. And he's overcome by his response to her. And it's the best Shakespeare you've ever seen in your life, these college students. It's unbelievable. And it's unbelievable because it wasn't a surface acting. It was connecting at depth. And you can feel it, okay? So what can happen when you're actually connecting at depth? Things become real and become alive. And that's where the transformative magic lies. Well, now let's take a look at a couple, get a little bit into this, give you a couple of quotes here about this level we call depth. So this is Gabriel Marcel, okay? This is a quote from Marcel. The person who is broken open is hospitable to others. The doors of his soul are ajar. Does that describe me, by the way, at the Enterprise rental car counter? No. Here's a quote from Buber. In an essential relation, the barrier of the individual is breached and a new phenomenon appears, one life open to another. The other becomes present not merely in the imagination or feeling, but in the depths of one's substance. The two participate in one another's lives. In very fact, not psychically, but ontically. That is, at the level of being. We participate in each other's lives in the level of forming each other. Okay? Here's Buber again. When connected in this way, we are seized in our depths and opened out by the dynamic of an elemental togetherness. The interhuman opens out what otherwise remains unopened. And you can see now this sort of merging in the center. You have this thing that's happening. There's a new offspring in the world that's being birthed by this merger. This is the new sort of water molecule that's appearing, if you will, as people are getting together. And then you have Marcel again, who says, in communion, the being with whom I am is not only before me and not only in me. Between us a bond exists through which I am created through a specific transforming encounter. It is the we which creates the I. Okay, so levels of relation. Now with that, let's say I'm a leader and I want to pursue transformation. How do I do that? How do we, as Chris was saying, create the conditions for transformation to happen? Well, in my experience, there are really two key ways to do that. And let's take a look. Up there's sort of a form of an org chart. It's not sort of a standard way of looking at a company, but just that's a kind of an org chart. You have people in different positions. It could also be sort of a picture of this room. It could be a picture of this room, a picture of a company. It could be sort of groups in our nation that are all grouped up with certain political viewpoints or other sort of viewpoints. They're all sort of grouped up together. It could be anything like that, okay? And so the question there is, how can we, I want to see that print so I don't get ahead of myself. Okay, so, I want to go back. I missed something here. So on this org chart, what is of any org chart, what do you think is the most important part of an org chart? Any thoughts? You saw it up there if you read. It's the between. The in-between all the people, that's where all the action is. It's in the in-between. It's not what's on the org chart. We are taking seriously all the positions and the levels and the relative levels. The between is where it happens. It's the most important part of any org chart. Okay? It's the most important part of every community. It's the between. We're already grouped up in our groups. It's what's happening in the between. Whether that merge is going to happen, whether that convergence is going to happen. That's the question. So, and here's a little quote I'll read you if I printed this off. This is from, we have a thing, you can go to withy.com if you'd like, you can read, there's a lot there you can dive into, but this is from what we call the Withy Manifesto. Here's a couple of principles from a list of 20 principles that make up the Withy Manifesto. The essential connectedness of humankind means that there is no isolated I, but rather I in relation. A person is the relational dynamic activity of I other rather than the solitary static state of I. What to the I appears separate about us, our bodies, is no longer the driver of human work or organizational success. The space between the boxes on org charts is where the action is, as that is the realm of relation, which in turn changes the character and potential of what is inside the boxes. Heart-based, in other words, relation-based org charts and practices look very different from body-based, in other words, position-based org charts and practices, okay? So the space, the in-between, is where the action is, where the magic is, okay? Okay, with that, so if we're going to pursue transformation, what can we do? Well, I'm going to suggest two key things that as a leader in a community or an organization that can be done. One is this. This is too small here. We want to promote two things: more interactions and relationships, that's one. And we want to promote deeper interactions and relationships, that's two. Okay? So let's start on the more. So if this is a company, we're going to increase the number or breadth of interactions across the system. You notice the way this is, let's see. Yeah, let's see if I can. Whoop. So let's take one of these groups. Even on the teams, they're all divided from each other, yeah? And so first of all, we might need to increase interactions inside the team. So I'll just put that there. So what do we do as a leader to increase interaction inside the team, to increase what's happening in the between? How about, but now you got interactions inside the teams. What about between teams? Well, then as a leader, you want to increase the interactions between the teams as well. That's one thing we can do. There's all kinds of things you can do to help increase interactions. The second then is now we want to increase the depth of those interactions. So where currently we're separate, let's at least go to surface. Let's increase the depth. We'll start at surface. We're not going to go from separate to depth. That's unlikely to happen. Let's create these opportunities for us to be interacting. So we'll go to surface first. And where we're at surface, let's take it to depth. Okay? And the deeper you go, what does that say there, Chris? Yeah, as relational depth increases, barriers, surfaces, and boundaries dissolve, separate individuals and teams transformed into integrated wholes. So if you see now, the boundaries come down inside the teams. Ultimately, the boundaries of the teams can disappear. You become an integrated whole, which brings me to, there's a really super interesting thinker that almost no one has heard of before. I highly recommend him. His name is Jan Smuts, and I'm going to read just a couple things that Smuts said about this essential sort of transformational. This is transforming from two hydrogen atoms and an oxygen atom into water. That's what you want to have happen in an organization. We want to be water, or whatever the equivalent. We want to be an organism functioning together. Here's what Smuts says. The essential transformational process in the universe is the movement towards ever more and deeper wholeness, right? I mean, atoms combine into molecules, molecules combine into cells, cells become larger organisms, all of that. Here, and for us, you know, I can just be about myself, but then I can be part of a larger team, and then I can break out, and that team can embrace more people, and that wholeness can continue to move out. Then he writes, a whole is a complex of parts, but so close and intimate and so unified that the characters and relations and activities of the parts are affected and changed by the synthesis. I'm different because I'm with you all in this. You have changed me. I'm bringing more of myself than I otherwise would have because we're all part of this venture, this whole together. And then he says, it is through a continuous process of whole making that reality is transformed step by step. Well, so that's what, when we're transforming, what we're ultimately doing is we're wanting to transform, become more integrated wholes. Less just separate and more integrated. And integrated is so important in an organization, so critical in a community. And how important is that in a nation? That we can connect across divides. Doesn't mean we all necessarily agree, but we can be in relation and be open to one another. Now, one last thing here before I close my remarks. I want to talk about how can you evaluate transformation readiness. Part of what we do at Withy Leadership Center is we help organizations in the transformational process, and part of that is we help evaluate their transformation readiness. And the way you do that, if you think about, I'm going to just share with you just quickly, there's sort of, if we're going to come together the way we're going to transform from these separate sort of individuals and teams into really wholes. The playing field where that happens is across our attitudes need to come along with that. Our behaviors need to comport with that. But culturally, we can have a culture that's keeping us separate, for example, where it's okay just to continue separate. Or we can have structures or systems in the organization, that's the top right quadrant, that actually reinforce separateness. So when you're looking in a holistically how we can come together, it's not enough only to change attitudes of individuals in the organization. It's not enough only to change behaviors in an organization. It's not enough only to work on the culture. You have to work on all of these pieces together. Take a four-dimensional approach. For those of you who are interested, there's a paper on this that I've written called Achieving Four-Dimensional Change that we'll get right over to you here in a moment. I'll flash something up on the screen. You'll be able to grab that if you want. So transforming is really pulling together across these quadrants, the culture quadrant, the structure quadrant, behaviorally, attitudinally, and become more and more together. And we actually have an assessment, which I'm going to make available to you here, that you can apply. You can take it yourself. You can apply it to your organizations that will measure where you're at across all of these quadrants. So how together are we? Are we separate? Are we getting more together? How fully have we transformed that direction? How ready are we to transform further? This, I'm just going to click through this quickly. This assessment, if you take it, will evaluate sort of your connectedness in the organization at four different levels. It can be sort of at a subtraction level in the organization. It can be better than that. It can be up to addition. It can be up to a multiplication level, which is really good. Or it can get up to the level of what we call compounding, which is where the magic is. And the assessment will dive into your organization, given your responses, and give you feedback on where you are on that scale. And give you an example. Here's a company we were just working with just a couple weeks ago, and when the CEO took the assessment, his view of the organization is we're at 3.3 out of 4. 4 is like we're killing it as we're total compounders. He's thinking we're at 3.3, and when the whole organization took it, everyone in the organization took it, where do you think they came out? Higher or lower? Lower. Yeah, the organization average came out at 2.35, okay. So it was 3.3, and now 2.35, which is we're a little bit better than addition, but we're not even up toward multiplication very much yet. And so the data that it kicked out to them and where it showed them where they're weak, they were particularly weak in one of the quadrants attitudinally, which gives you all kinds of strategies that you can deploy. So one thing you could consider doing, depending on whether you're situated in an organization where you think this would be helpful, is you could actually access this assessment. So I'm going to put this QR code up on the screen, If you're interested, there are 3 things that we'll send to you immediately. There's a white paper called Achieving 4-Dimensional Change that I've written. Another one called Breaking Open, Unlocking Human Connection. We'll get you much more into these different levels of relationship and connection. You get both of those, and we'll give you that access to that assessment, which you can take. It'll take you about 5-6 minutes, and then you'll get back a report that will give you a view on what where your organization is at, given your responses. Okay. And then if you'd like, you could, your whole organization can run through that. We can talk about that if you're interested. So if you is that working if you're putting your phone up there? Okay. You just put in your name. I think you have to put your name and your email address, and you click the button, and you'll immediately get those items into your box. Okay. Now, with that, let's close to come back with the question where we started. So if this room's a metaphor, okay, for a company, for society, for each of us individually, what would transformation mean? Now, do you have a view in your mind now after what we talked about, what might need to happen in this room if we're going to actually transform in this room? And if you were to take this room as, this isn't just a metaphor, this is Salem, Oregon. This is a cut across the community, right? And if we were to take those sorts, what we've talked about, sort of those interactions, deepening those as well, and coming together more and more as integrated wholes across the community, what would that mean? Not just in this room, what would it mean to the area? How exciting would that be? Now, in my experience, those are elements that will help, as Chris said, to create the conditions where the transformations that are out there that they can happen. If we go to those places, that's how we'll, as leaders and as participants in the community, most make them likely. And I think, as I said, this ability to transform away from our separateness and become more and more whole together, I think it's what we most need. It's what I care about most. That's probably a pretty common view in here as well. And you guys are positioned here in Salem, given what you're doing together, to go places earlier that way than I think most other people in the nation actually, frankly, are. Okay? So I congratulate you on all the efforts you've already made, for the relationships you have formed and are continuing to form. I invite you to double down on that and to see what happens as a result. Okay? I'm excited to watch you. Okay? Thank you. Thank you for the time. Chris, thanks for having me.